I'm Matt Hilston, Web Technology Lead at the MakeCode Educational Foundation. And
I'm Rob Knight. I'm web developer for the MakeCode Educational Foundation. It serves as a good mic test as well. Good.
Excellent stuff. Over the past couple of years, we've been working closely with the Blockly team and the Microsoft MakeCode team on, first of all, keyboard navigation in Blockly and then MakeCode. And this year, the real focus has been on screen reader, as you've heard. This is the agenda we're going to run through today, talking through in a bit more detail the process from prototype to release, focusing on some of the details of the feedback that we got from user testing, thinking about the difficult problems, and then some problems that were specific to MakeCode and might come up in your app too. It's worth taking a moment to just think back to where we started. MakeCode and Blockly were actually in quite different places. Thinking about the rest of the app, the other parts that aren't the Blockly workspace, MakeCode was in pretty good shape and also had an easier problem. You could already use it with a screen reader, and it was more a matter of testing and making sure those parts worked well and that we had an end-to-end journey folks could use when we had screen reader support working in the Blockly workspace. Blockly, however, taken great steps forward with keyboard navigation, but if you tried to use it with a screen reader in V12, my experience on Mac and VoiceOver was every time you navigate, it goes graphics symbol, which I heard a lot to begin with, and every so often I use the wrong MakeCode instance, and I still get that. There was a really big gap, and it wasn't so obvious how to fill it. In MakeCode, if something wasn't working quite right, there was a pattern that we could just reach for. There were standard approaches to dealing with problems. But in Blockly, there was a bigger design piece, and the route forward wasn't so clear. So this was the high-level approach. Blockly team created an experimental Blockly branch that we ran with for a very long time in a prototype version of MakeCode. And we used that to put that in front of users and give them an end-to-end experience in MakeCode that they could relate to, that was a typical experience in every way, apart from using it via a screen reader. And we iterated on that as we got feedback from user testing, and we fed that information to the Blockly team to shape their final design. This is the high-level structure, I guess similar to some slides you might already have seen. I guess I might focus on two things. The panel testing that you've heard about was so useful to us when we had to dive into something that was more tangled or more involved, things like if blocks, which Rob might touch on later, and going into things in a level of detail that you can't fit into a traditional user testing session. And then where we are now, we currently have a MakeCode beta that is using a beta of Blockly and is in a pretty good shape. And we're squashing those final bugs and waiting eagerly for Blockly v13. Some of the more interesting parts of the project, we're thinking about block labels and the interactions and getting a balance between telling people everything they need to know, but also keeping it simple and easy to understand. We focused on a fluent block label. So for example, for the show number block up there, we would read something quite like show number 1 + 2. That's probably how you would read that part of the program out to someone if they were asking what the program was. But it leaves quite a lot of questions unanswered. How many inputs or editable things are there in that block? As we started to add those sorts of details, we found that that could be too much information. And focusing on the fluency was much easier for people to understand the program. But you do need some kind of indication that a part of a block can be edited, that it's worth navigating into that block to find out more. So we ended up going for a simpler approach that just said, this block has inputs, it's worth navigating into it to find out more. And we used a shortcut for additional information when more information on the block's position or inputs is needed. A common refrain in the user testing was information overload. That's way too much information in a label. Or why does it say block every time I know I'm in the workspace? Everything is a block, with the occasional exception like a comment. Some of our early labels were really quite verbose and tried to do a lot. And a theme of the feedback and the iteration was really simplifying, leaving people to navigate to find out more, or perhaps use another key to find out extra information. One of the really interesting things that happened in this project was thinking about naming things. There were suddenly names that perhaps we already had, but they were a name that existed in an API or some developer documentation that we needed to surface to screen reader users. So we needed to describe blocks like on P0 pressed, because it's important, on pin P0 pressed, because it's important to understand that you can put things inside of that block, or similarly, the repeat block. And when we reached for existing terminology, it wasn't always a good fit. So one of the things we talked about is describing these as C-shaped blocks, which I think is pretty common in the Blockly ecosystem. But when we tested this with folks, we got the feedback that actually they don't relate to C-shape in necessarily the same way. If your experience of text is primarily as Braille, then the C is 2 dots. It's not that same shape that you imagine containing something. We also found that there's other information encoded in the block, such as its color. So you can tell that these blocks come from a certain category in the toolbox. And that's probably not something you want to hear every time you touch on a block, every time you navigate to a block. But sometimes it's really important. If you want to swap out a block, find something similar. Maybe you've got a music block and you want to find another one. You need to be able to reach for that correct toolbox category. So it's another example of something that was pushed behind a keyboard shortcut so that you could get the information if you need it, but you didn't have to listen to it again and again as you navigated through a program that might be built of a whole bunch of input blocks or music blocks. I'm going to hand over to Rob now to take you through some of the other learnings.
Right. Rather than just the block labels, we've got block fields and block inputs. So for instance, we've got loud, which is highlighted, which is a drop down. We've got 128, which is a text input that you can change to a different value. And we've got to communicate how these are editable to the user. And I think one of the first implementations of this was it actually told you it was a combo box, or it told you it was a text input. But if you are focused on this drop down and you hit the down arrow to open it, which is what you might expect, nothing happens, or you just navigate down to the block below. And similarly, if you're on 128 and you start typing, nothing's going to happen. And that's because these are kind of unusual inputs. They're not like native HTML inputs at this point. They're SVG. You've got to hit enter or hit space to actually open these up. And it's going to pop open a list box, or it's going to pop open a very carefully positioned real HTML text box over that 128, which are then normally editable, or it can pop open a dialog or something else. So it was really this like thing that all these different roles that you might use for sort of non-native inputs come with expected keyboard navigation that you need to implement, otherwise your users are going to get very confused. And in the end, we've just settled for these being buttons. And I think there's been more iteration. So it's saying that, hey, this is something that's going to pop open a list box. It's a button. It's an editable thing. And all that is put together into the label. And I think it now works a lot better than it did. And then moving on from individual blocks, we've got to think about the program structure itself. And to loop or not to loop. And I mean not programmatic looping. I mean, if you're navigating something top to bottom, what happens when you get to the very end? Normally you hit down, and you might find yourself back at the top again. And you'll just keep looping through. And for keyboard navigation, for sighted users, that's what they want. It feels like they're not getting stuck at the top or the bottom of a program. They can see where their focus is jumping to, and it's really kind of good for them. When we tested this with screen reader users, they were just hitting the down arrow like really quite quickly. And then the code was like, where is all this code coming from? And they were trying to find the boundaries of the program. Like, why am I stopping at the bottom? So it gives this impression that there's lots and lots of code there. In reality, it was like, maybe it's just a few blocks there. So we found like we need to add these hard stops. So now you can go left and hit a stop, go right, hit a stop, go to the top, go to the bottom, and it'll hit a stop, and it'll beep at you to tell you that nothing is happening when you're pushing the arrow button anymore. You've reached the end of the program. And this kind of says like we need a different mode for screen reader users than just for keyboard users. So it really let us know at that point that we do need something separate. As a keyboard user, you don't want to hear beeps all the time, but for a screen reader user, you need that audible feedback. Communicating structure. So lots of Blockly programs have nesting. This is particularly true of MakeCode because we have a lot of event blocks. So it's always starting on something like on shake or on start or forever. There's always something inside of it. And how do you tell people that these blocks are nested inside one another? And again, I think one of the original implementations was that everything in the workspace was a tree. So trees naturally have a level 1, level 2, level 3, but in user testing, we found this to be quite verbose. So we simplified it, but we lost that nesting information. And one of the, I don't remember who suggested it, I think it was a panel member, was talking about how about we have beeps when you move into nesting, when you come out of nesting, you get high-pitched beeps as you go further and further into nesting, lower-pitched beeps as you come back out. So it kind of tells you you're moving in and out of things. And in combination with that, we've got this little end position that was reintroduced. I think this was toyed with during the keyboard navigation development and didn't make it in because we thought it was simpler without it, but we found that we needed it for screen reader users because it tells you you are at the end of the repeat 3 times do block. And at this point, you can either insert another input, so you can put another statement block in there, or you know that at this point, if you move down 1 more position, you're coming out of that block. And you'll hear the beep as you do. So just really important to try and communicate the structure of the program that sighted users, or certainly me as a sighted user, just kind of take for granted. MakeCode in your app. So we hit some specific MakeCode challenges that may well be applicable to you. I think we will see. Custom field editors, for one. These kind of vary from simple to very complicated. The one on the right is an example of quite a complicated one. And first of all, we need to tell people when they land on this melody, this little gray oval up here, what is that? How do you describe that? We just say it's a melody or it's an empty melody. Is it a melody of notes? We obviously can't describe the whole thing, but we need to tell people that it's going to pop up a dialogue. We need to tell people it's a button that's going to edit something, which we now do. It opens up quite a complex field editor. It's got something with tabs in it that you can move between an editor and a gallery. It's got some fairly standard inputs at the bottom, so an input, a button to play, and a button to say that you're done with it. And then this weird grid in the middle, which is actually 8 columns, and you can have a note in each column, and that's your melody. And the note varies from pitch from the bottom to the top. And we had a great deal of trouble trying to communicate this, and in the end, we found that it goes against what we said, right? Less is more in most cases, but in this case, we need quite a long label to tell people what this is and how to use it. Simultaneous events, this one really tripped us up. There's still no good solution to this, but say I'm editing my program. We added a single letter shortcut in the workspace L to download the program to the microbit. Screen reader users are often using sound, particularly on the start, to let you know what's going on. So you download, focus moves back to the workspace once the download is done. The screen reader is telling you what you're focused on. The microbit is playing some music at you, and 2 things are going on at once. And how do you solve that problem? It's really, really hard. There's no sort of technical solution, but we've been telling people about hitting control to stop the screen reader output, or you can reset the microbit to play it again. Same with the simulator in MakeCode. It plays automatically when you're updating your code. And you can see it playing if you're a sighted user. But if you're not, you just get this kind of music playing in the background. So we had to run another shortcut that tells the simulator to stop and start, and you get feedback from a live region that tells you when it's running and when it's not. I've got time. If blocks, really painful experience, I would say. It's in MakeCode because it's not a vanilla Blockly version of an if block, and I know a lot of Blockly apps have their own versions of if blocks. And it's unique, or almost unique, in a way that it has multiple input statements. And it's kind of like, in this case, 3 blocks masquerading as 1. The initial implementation was reading out if num equals 0, then else if num equals 1, then else. Too much, way too much. We actually had this, and I thought was a pretty good place. We tested it. It was wrong. So we iterated it again a few more times with the youth panel to actually get it to I think, we agree it's the best position it can be in. So it's now more like a row-wise navigation and a row-wise readout. So it will say if num equals 0. Then you move down into ringtone. Then you move down into the else-if condition. But in this case, you get the else-if label as well. So it really tells you where you are. We've got buttons in here that mutate this block. So you can add extra else-ifs. You can remove them. They're properly labeled. There's ARIA live feedback to tell you that you've removed a branch or you've added a branch. And we also manipulate the focus. So when you add something, we try and put the focus in a helpful place, not just on the button you were on, or not accidentally falling back to the whole block itself. So I think we've got it in a reasonable state. Quick takeaways, less is more. I'm not going to read all these out. Keyboard controls, you need to make sure that they're correct for the element roles that you choose. Custom field editors, make sure they're accessible and comprehensible, so longer labels, fine in that case. Test with multiple screen readers, my God, they're all different. They behave differently, and sometimes in subtle ways, and sometimes in major ways, and you've really got to test them to know how they're going to behave and make changes accordingly. Questions in a second. Just want to point out that you can try this out yourself. We have a hands-on experience at 3 p.m. In the conference room. So if you want to come along and try it before it's released, give us any feedback. You're very welcome. Thank you.